The city had learned to look away when he passed. For 3 centuries, the Vampire King had walked among mortals like a shadow dressed in expensive fabric. Untouchable, unreachable, wrapped in the kind of silence that comes from being feared more than death itself. But on that November evening, in a fluorescent-lit grocery store that smelled of bleach and desperation, something ancient inside him cracked. It wasn't the poverty he noticed first. He'd seen empires rise and fall on the backs of the poor. It was the way a small hand reached up to wipe a tear from her mother's face, the gesture so tender it seemed to stop time. And when the mother placed that single carton of milk back on the shelf, her fingers trembling with shame no one should have to carry, the king felt something he thought had died with his humanity, the unbearable weight of caring. The supermarket's lights buzzed with that particular frequency that made everything look sickly and unreal. Adrian Nocturne, though no one in this part of town knew that name, stood by the wine section, his pale fingers wrapped around a bottle he had no intention of drinking. He didn't need wine. He needed the pretense of normalcy, the illusion that he was just another customer in an overcoat, killing time before heading home. But normalcy shattered the moment he saw her. She stood 3 aisles away, backlit by the dairy section's cold glow, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her coat was thin, too thin for November, and patched at the elbows with fabric that didn't quite match. In her arms, she cradled a wire basket containing exactly 4 items: a loaf of discount bread, a bruised apple, a box of generic cereal, and a carton of milk. Adrian's enhanced vision caught the tremor in her hands as she stared at the items, her lips moving in silent calculation. She was counting, recounting. Her face held the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than sleeplessness. It was a fatigue of someone who had been fighting too long with too little. Beside her, partially hidden behind her mother's coat, stood a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, maybe 6. Dark curls framed a face that was all eyes, huge, luminous, achingly trusting. The child's gaze was fixed on the milk carton with an intensity that made Adrian's dead heart twist in his chest. "Mama?" The word was barely a whisper, but in the harsh quiet of the store, it carried. "Is it can we?" The woman, she couldn't have been more than 28, though hardship had carved decades into the corners of her eyes, knelt down slowly. Her knees cracked audibly. She cupped her daughter's face with hands that were raw and chapped from work Adrian could only imagine. "Baby," she said, and her voice broke on the single syllable. "Not tonight. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The little girl nodded, but her lower lip trembled. She didn't cry, and that restraint, that learned suppression of need, was somehow worse than tears would have been. Adrian watched as the mother stood, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone walking on ice that might crack at any moment. She lifted the milk carton from her basket and turned toward the dairy case to return it. That's when their eyes met. It lasted only a fraction of a second, a collision of gazes across the antiseptic brightness of a grocery store that had seen 1,000 small tragedies just like this one. But in that instant, Adrian saw everything. The shame burning in her cheeks, the defiance in her jaw, the plea she would never voice, and beneath it all, a fierce maternal love that made his centuries-old existence feel suddenly, devastatingly hollow. She looked away first. Of course, people always did. Even those who didn't know what he was could sense something fundamentally other about him, something that triggered ancient prey instincts. She turned back to the refrigerated case, and with hands that shook visibly now, she opened the glass door. Adrian moved before he could think, before the rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive for 300 years by maintaining distance, by never getting involved, could stop him. "Excuse me." His voice cut through the store's ambient noise like a knife through silk. The woman froze, the milk carton still in her hand, the refrigerator door hanging open and bleeding cold air into the aisle. She turned slowly, and Adrian saw her posture shift, defensive, wary, preparing for whatever fresh humiliation the universe had decided to throw at her tonight. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, 25, maybe 26. Her face, despite its exhaustion, held remnants of what must have once been striking beauty. High cheekbones, a strong nose, lips that probably smiled easily in better times. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter storms, and they watched him with the kind of guarded calculation that spoke of too many men who had offered help with strings attached. "I couldn't help but notice," Adrian said carefully, pitching his voice to something approximating human warmth, "that you're putting that back. It's none of your business." The words came out harder than she probably intended, sharp with the brittleness of someone who had been pushed too far, too often. The little girl peered out from behind her mother's legs, those enormous eyes fixed on Adrian with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're right," he said simply. "It's not." He could have compelled her. It would have been easy. A whisper of ancient power, a subtle rewriting of her resistance, and she would accept whatever he offered with a smile and no questions. But the thought made something in him recoil. This woman had so little left. Her dignity, her agency, her right to refuse. Those were sacred in a way his kind rarely understood. "But I'm going to pay for it anyway," Adrian continued, and before she could protest, he reached out and gently, careful not to touch her skin directly, took the milk carton from her hands. Their fingers didn't make contact, but he felt the heat radiating from her nonetheless. The pulse of blood beneath her skin that sang a siren song he'd learned long ago to ignore. No, the word was firm, definitive. She reached for the carton, but Adrian had already stepped back, holding it out of reach with the kind of preternatural speed that made the movement seem almost casual. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," Adrian said, and in that moment, he wasn't entirely sure what it was. Penance, perhaps. An attempt to prove to himself that he hadn't become entirely monstrous. Consider it evening the scales. What scales? Her eyes narrowed, and he saw her hand move instinctively to her daughter's shoulder, pulling the child closer. Protective, always protective, the ones that have been tipped against you for too long. Adrian turned toward the checkout before she could argue further, adding the milk to his own basket, which now contained only a bottle of wine he wouldn't drink and a carton of milk for a child he'd never met. He was aware of her following him, aware of the war being waged behind her eyes between pride and necessity, between the urge to tell him go to hell and the desperate need to give her daughter something as simple, as fundamental as milk. At the register, the cashier, a tired woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, looked between Adrian and the woman with the kind of knowing expression that said she'd seen this dance before. Adrian pulled out his wallet, black leather worn soft with age, and extracted 2 crisp $100 bills. "Ring up her items as well," he said quietly. The woman behind him made a sound, protest or surrender. He couldn't tell, but she didn't leave. She stood there, her daughter pressed against her side, watching as the cashier scanned the bread, the apple, the cereal, the milk. When the total came to $37.18, Adrian pushed the bills across the counter. "Keep the change," he said to the cashier, whose eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Sir, that's—" "Keep it, please." He gathered a single bottle of wine and turned to face the woman. She stood clutching her grocery bag against her chest like armor, her daughter's hand clasped tightly in her own. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Adrian found he couldn't quite meet them. "Why?" The question was barely audible. "You don't know us. You don't know anything about—" "I know enough," Adrian interrupted softly. "I know that your daughter is hungry. I know that you were choosing between feeding her and getting home safely. I know that you've been making choices like that for longer than anyone should have to." A tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily with the back of her hand. "I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to." The little girl tugged on her mother's coat. When the woman looked down, the child whispered something Adrian's enhanced hearing caught easily. "He has kind eyes, Mama." If his heart still beat, it would have stuttered in that moment. Kind eyes. When was the last time anyone had called him kind? When was the last time he'd done anything to deserve such a description? The woman took a shaky breath, seemed to come to some internal decision. "Thank you," she said finally, the words clearly costing her something. "I thank you." She turned to leave, but Adrian found himself speaking again, unable to let this moment end, unable to return to his empty penthouse and his emptier existence, knowing that tomorrow night she would be back here making the same impossible calculations. "Wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. Her entire body was tense, wound tight as a spring. "What's your name?" A pause. Then quietly, "Elena. And this is Sophie." "Elena." He let the name rest on his tongue, testing its shape. "I'm Adrian." Now she did turn, and her expression was complicated. Gratitude warring with suspicion, hope fighting with the hard lessons of experience. "Why does it matter?" "Because," Adrian said, and realized he was speaking a truth he hadn't known until this moment, "I think our paths are meant to cross again. I don't believe in fate." "Neither did I." He smiled then, just slightly, and saw her eyes widen as she caught, perhaps, a glimpse of something not quite human in that expression. But she didn't run. She simply studied him for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't realized she'd been given. Finally, she nodded once. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Elena." "Sophie." He watched them leave, the little girl waving shyly over her shoulder, and felt the weight of his immortality settle over him like a familiar shroud. Around him, the store continued its mundane operation, the cashier counting his change into the register, other customers shuffling through their late evening shopping, the fluorescent lights buzzing their endless, headache-inducing song. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had cracked in the careful architecture of his isolation. Adrian pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered on the first ring. "Marcus," he said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the door through which Elena and Sophie had disappeared. "I need you to find someone for me." His second-in-command, loyal for over a century, didn't ask questions. "Name?" "Elena. First name only. Single mother. One daughter named Sophie, approximately 5 or 6 years old. Shopping at the discount grocery on Morrison Street." He paused, then added, "I want to know everything. Where she lives, where she works, why she's in this situation." "And Marcus?" "Yes, my lord." "Be discreet. She doesn't know what I am, and I'd like to keep it that way as long as possible." A pause on the other end. Then carefully, "My lord, forgive me, but is this wise?" Adrian looked down at the bottle of wine in his hand, then at the receipt still clutched in his other palm. Physical proof of the most impulsive thing he'd done in decades. "Probably not," he admitted, "but do it anyway." He ended the call and walked out into the November night. The air was sharp with approaching winter, carrying hints of rain and exhaust fumes and 1,000 human lives being lived in the city around him. Above, the sky was starless, choked with light pollution and cloud cover. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Adrian felt something other than the endless gray monotony of immortal existence. He felt curious, concerned, connected. He felt, God's help him, almost human. And as he disappeared into the shadows that had been his kingdom for 3 centuries, Adrian Nocturne, the vampire king who had built his power on fear and distance, allowed himself to wonder what he had just set in motion, and whether Elena and her daughter Sophie would be his salvation or his destruction. Perhaps both. The city lights blurred past as he moved through the darkness, and somewhere in the space between heartbeats, he smiled. The next 48 hours passed in a strange, blurred discovery. Marcus worked with his usual efficiency, and by the following evening, a thick folder sat on Adrian's mahogany desk in his penthouse office. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it, aware that he was about to cross another line, invade another boundary. But curiosity, and something deeper, something he didn't want to name, won out. Elena Martinez, 26 years old, daughter of immigrants who had died in a car accident when she was 19, leaving her alone in a country that suddenly felt hostile and foreign. She'd been in college then, studying to be a teacher, but had dropped out when she discovered she was pregnant. The father, a boy named Daniel who'd promised her the world, had disappeared the moment he found out, leaving nothing but a forwarded phone number that no longer worked. For the past 6 years, she'd been working 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, waitressing during the day, and doing alterations for a dry cleaner on weekends. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town, the kind of building where the landlord ignored complaints, and the walls were thin enough to hear every fight, every cry, every moment of desperation from the families packed in like sardines. Sophie attended a public school that was underfunded and overcrowded. Her teachers noted that she was bright, exceptionally so, but quiet withdrawn. She rarely played with other children. Her lunchbox was often empty. Adrian read every word, his jaw tightening with each new detail. This wasn't just poverty. This was a system designed to crush people like Elena, to punish them for daring to be vulnerable, for choosing love over practicality, for trying to build something good in a world that rewarded only the ruthless. By the time he finished reading, dawn was approaching. He could feel in his bones that ancient pull toward darkness and sleep. But instead of retreating to his chambers, Adrian made another call. "I need you to set something up," he said when Marcus answered. "A job. Something legitimate. Something she'll believe is real. Good pay, reasonable hours, benefits. And find a better apartment for them. Nothing too obvious. She'll refuse if it looks like charity." "My lord," Marcus said carefully, "you're aware that this level of involvement could expose you. If she discovers what you are, then I'll deal with it." Adrian's voice was cold, final. "Just do as I ask." "Of course. Might I suggest the Education Foundation we fund? They're always looking for administrative staff, and given her background—" "Perfect. Make it happen." He hung up and finally allowed himself to retreat to his chambers, a windowless room deep in the heart of his building where daylight could never reach. As he lay in the darkness, waiting for sleep to claim him, Adrian found himself thinking not of blood or power or the endless chess game of vampire politics that usually occupied his mind. He thought of gray eyes filled with shame and defiance, of a little girl's hand reaching up to comfort her mother, of the weight of that milk carton in his hands. Such a small thing, such an enormous symbol. And he wondered, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last, if redemption was possible for a creature like him. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her tiny bathroom, adjusting a blouse she'd borrowed from her neighbor. The email had come out of nowhere, an interview for an administrative position at the Morrison Education Foundation. The pay was more than all 3 of her current jobs combined. The hours were regular. There were benefits, including health insurance for Sophie. It was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But desperation made optimists of even the most cynical, and Elena had learned long ago that you didn't survive by turning down opportunities, even suspicious ones. So she'd responded to the email, scheduled the interview, and now found herself staring at a reflection that looked both hopeful and terrified. "You look pretty, Mama." Sophie sat on the closed toilet lid, swinging her legs, her school backpack already strapped to her small shoulders. The apartment was too cold. The landlord had forgotten to fix the heating again, and Sophie wore 2 sweaters layered over her school uniform. "Thank you, baby." Elena turned, crouched down, and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. Sophie smelled like the cheap strawberry shampoo they shared and something indefinably sweet that was purely her own. "Mrs. Chun is going to walk you to school today, okay? I have that meeting." "The important one?" "The very important one." Sophie pulled back, her small hands framing Elena's face with a seriousness that belonged to someone much older. "Then you'll get it, because you're the smartest mama in the whole world." Elena's eyes burned. "I love you. You know that, right? No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, I love you more than anything." "I know." Sophie kissed her mother's nose, a ritual they developed when Sophie was barely old enough to walk. "And I love you more than ice cream." "More than ice cream?" Elena gasped in mock horror. "That's serious." They were both laughing when Mrs. Chin knocked on the door, and Elena felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today would be the day things finally started to turn around. The Morrison Education Foundation occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming building in the city's business district. Elena had never been in this part of town before, not as anything other than cleaning staff who entered through back doors and worked in the small hours when the important people were home sleeping. The lobby was all marble and glass, and Elena felt acutely aware of her borrowed blouse. Her shoes that she'd polished into the worn leather almost looked new, her hands that no amount of lotion could fully soften. But the receptionist smiled at her warmly, directed her to the elevators, and told her that Ms. Reeves was expecting her on the 15th floor. The interview was strange. Not in any way Elena could put her finger on exactly. Ms. Reeves was professional, kind even, asking questions about Elena's experience, her goals, her situation. But there was something in the woman's eyes, a knowing quality that made Elena feel like this was less an interview and more formality. Your background is unconventional, Ms. Reeves said, reviewing the resume that Elena had hastily assembled from years of fragmented work experience. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We value different perspectives here. And your reference, she glanced at a paper Elena couldn't see, speaks very highly of you. My reference? Elena frowned. She hadn't listed any references. She had no one to list. Ms. Reeves smiled. We conducted our own background check. Entirely standard. Everything came back exemplary. You're punctual, hard-working, honest. Those qualities are harder to find than people realize. The conversation continued, but Elena felt like she was floating slightly outside her body, watching the scene unfold from a distance. When Ms. Reeves finally stood and extended her hand, Elena took it automatically. Welcome to the Morrison Foundation. Elena, we'll start you next Monday. 9 to 5 with an hour for lunch. Health insurance begins immediately, and there's a child care subsidy for Sophie if you need it. Elena's voice cracked. Are you serious? I got the job. You got the job. Elena made it to the elevator before the tears came. She pressed herself into a corner as the doors closed, covering her mouth to muffle the sobs that were equal parts relief, disbelief, and a bone-deep exhaustion finally given permission to surface. This was it. This was the break she'd been praying for, working for, dying for. The elevator stopped on the 7th floor. The doors opened and a man stepped in. Elena looked up through her tears and froze. Adrian. He stood in the elevator doorway, perfectly still, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than 6 months of her old rent. His pale eyes widened fractionally, surprise or something like it, and for a moment neither of them moved. Elena, her name sounded different in his mouth. Not just a word, but something precious, something weighted with meaning she couldn't decipher. What are you doing here? She wiped at her face hastily, embarrassed by the tears, by the mess she must look like. I just had an interview. I got a job. Here, at the foundation. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Congratulations. Thank you. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. Adrian stepped fully into the elevator, and the doors closed behind him. The space suddenly felt much smaller. He reached out, slowly, telegraphing the movement like he was approaching a skittish animal, and handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. It was real linen, monogrammed with initials she couldn't quite make out. I'm sorry, she said, taking it, dabbing at her eyes. This is so unprofessional. It's been a really hard few years. You don't need to apologize. His voice was gentle, almost unbearably so. How is Sophie? The question startled her. That he'd remember her daughter's name, that he'd thought to ask. It touched something raw inside her. She's good. She's great, actually. This job means I can finally... Her voice broke again. I can finally give her things. Not much, but more than nothing. Maybe even some things she wants, not just what she needs. The elevator descended in silence for a moment. Then Adrian spoke again, and there was something in his tone that made her look at him sharply. Elena, can I ask you something? Okay. Are you happy? Not just about the job. In general. Are you happy? It was such an odd question, so intimate and probing, that for a moment she didn't know how to answer. But there was something about him. Maybe the way he'd appeared that night in the grocery store, maybe the genuine concern in his eyes, that made her want to be honest. I don't know if I remember what happy feels like, she said quietly. I remember being happy before my parents died, before Daniel left, before everything got so hard. But now, I'm just trying to survive, to make sure Sophie survives. Happy feels like a luxury I can't afford. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the gleaming lobby, but neither of them moved. You deserve more than survival, Adrian said, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. You and Sophie both. You deserve joy, peace, A life that isn't just an endless string of impossible choices. That's a nice thought. Elena stepped out of the elevator, then turned back. But nice thoughts don't pay the bills. No, Adrian agreed, following her into the lobby. But maybe, he stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever he was about to say. Would you let me buy you coffee? To celebrate your new job. Every instinct Elena had developed over the past 6 years screamed at her to say no. She didn't know this man. Didn't know why he'd helped her that night. Didn't know why he was here now. Didn't know what he wanted. Men didn't just help women like her out of the goodness of their hearts. There was always a price. But when she looked at Adrian, she didn't see the predatory glint she'd learned to recognize in men's eyes. She saw something else. Something that looked almost like loneliness. Just coffee? She asked carefully. Just coffee. There's a cafe across the street. 20 minutes, and then you can go home to Sophie. Elena checked her phone. Mrs. Chin wouldn't bring Sophie home for another 2 hours. 20 minutes wouldn't hurt. Okay, she heard herself say. Just coffee. The cafe was warm and smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. Adrian ordered for both of them. Somehow Noah, without asking, that she took her coffee with cream and 2 sugars, and led her to a table by the window. Outside, the city moved in its endless rhythm, people rushing past with their important lives and their pressing concerns. So, Elena said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug, do you work at the foundation? I'm involved with it, yes. Adrian's coffee sat untouched in front of him, in an advisory capacity. What do you do? Like, for a job? If you don't mind me asking. I mind very little that you might ask. He smiled slightly. I have investments, various interests. I've been fortunate in business. It was a non-answer, but Elena let it slide. Rich people were always cagey about their money. And you just spend your free time haunting grocery stores, buying milk for strangers? That was a first, actually. Why did you do it? The question hung between them. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes fixed on something beyond the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost hesitant. I saw myself in you, not the circumstances. My life has been very different from yours. But the weight of it, the way you were carrying something almost too heavy to bear, and still trying to protect someone you loved, that kind of strength is rare. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on. Strength and desperation aren't mutually exclusive. Adrian finally looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her stomach flip. You're doing an impossible thing, raising a child alone with no support and no safety net. And you're doing it with grace. Grace. Elena laughed bitterly. I was returning milk because I couldn't afford it. That's not grace. You were making a choice to keep your daughter safe, even if it meant she went without. You were teaching her by example that dignity matters, that we don't take what we can't afford. That's grace, Elena. That's more than grace. She had to look away, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of emotion. When was the last time anyone had seen her? Really seen her, not just a tired woman in patched clothes, not just a struggling single mother, but the person beneath all that, the person who was trying so hard, who loved so fiercely, who woke up every morning and chose to keep fighting even when it felt hopeless. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. They sat in silence for a while, and it was surprisingly comfortable. Elena found herself studying him. The sharp planes of his face, the aristocratic features that looked like they belonged in an old painting, the way he held himself with a kind of stillness that seemed unnatural, like he was consciously remembering to breathe, to move, to seem human. Can I ask you something now? She ventured. Of course. Why do you seem so sad? Adrian's expression shifted. Surprise, then something that might have been pain. What makes you think I'm sad? I don't know. The way you look at the world. Maybe, like you're watching it from very far away. Like you don't quite belong in it. That's remarkably perceptive. I've gotten good at reading people. When you're as vulnerable as I am, you have to be. It's a survival skill. Adrian nodded slowly. To answer your question, I am sad. I have been for a very long time. I've lived a life of privilege and power, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to connect with anything real. Until he stopped. Elena waited. Until I saw you in that grocery store, he finished quietly. And I remember what it felt like to care about something other than myself. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Elena knew she should be wary, should recognize this for what it probably was. A rich man's fascination with Project, a momentary interest that would fade as soon as the novelty wore off. But she also knew what she felt when she looked at him. Not attraction, exactly, though he was beautiful in that cold, marble statue way. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe? The sense that they were both drowning in different oceans, but drowning nonetheless. I should go, she said finally, though she didn't want to. Sophie will be home soon. Of course. Adrian stood immediately, ever the gentleman. Thank you for the coffee, for the conversation. Thank you for... Elena gestured vaguely. Everything, I guess. The milk, the job, this. The job is yours on merit, Adrian said firmly. I may have connections to the foundation, but they wouldn't have hired you if you weren't qualified. Elena wasn't sure she believed that, but she nodded anyway. They walked to the door together, and as they stepped out into the cold November air, Adrian spoke once more. Elena, would it be all right if I checked in on you? You and Sophie, just to make sure you're settling into the new job, that everything's working out. She should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming to say no. But Elena had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts said that despite everything strange about the situation, Adrian Nocturne meant her no harm. Okay, she said, but slowly. I need to be careful. For Sophie's sake. I understand completely. I'll be patient. They parted ways on the sidewalk, and as Elena walked toward the bus stop, she couldn't resist looking back. Adrian was still standing there, perfectly still in the middle of the crowded sidewalk, his eyes fixed on her retreating form. And for just a moment, in the failing afternoon light, Elena could have sworn his eyes caught the light like a cat's, reflecting rather than absorbing, alien and beautiful and somehow terribly, terribly sad. She shivered and turned away, telling herself it was just a trick of the light. But somewhere deep inside, in a place that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct, Elena knew that Adrian Nocturne was not what he seemed. And despite every warning bell ringing in her mind, she found that she didn't care. The first month of the Morrison Foundation passed in a blur of new routines and small miracles. Elena's new apartment, arranged with the Foundation's housing assistance program, Ms. Reeves had explained, was clean, warm, and safe. Sophie had her own bedroom for the first time in her life, with windows that overlooked a small park where children played after school. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but compared to where they'd been, it felt like paradise. Adrian kept his word about patience. He appeared in Elena's life like clockwork. Once a week, never intrusive, never demanding. Coffee on Thursday afternoons became their ritual. He would ask about Sophie, about the job, about Elena's dreams beyond mere survival. And slowly, carefully, like someone coaxing a wild animal closer, he let her see glimpses of himself. He told her about loneliness, about living a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt hollow within, about the weight of responsibility he carried. Though he was vague about what those responsibilities were, about a family that was loyal but not quite loving, about centuries. He'd caught himself there, laughed it off as exhaustion, making him dramatic. Sometimes it just feels like I've been alive forever, he'd said, and Elena had nodded, understanding the sentiment if not the literal truth. What he never told her was what he did in the hours between sunset and dawn, why she'd never seen him during the day, why his skin was always cool to the touch on the rare occasions their hands brushed, why he never ate or drank anything when they were together, just held his coffee cup like a prop. But Elena noticed. Of course she noticed. It was Sophie who finally forced the question into the open. December had arrived with an early snow, and Elena had invited Adrian to dinner. A thank you, she'd told herself, nothing more. Sophie had been excited for days, helping cook, setting the table with the careful precision of someone who understood that this evening mattered. Adrian arrived precisely at 7, his arms full of gifts that made Elena's breath catch. Books for Sophie, beautiful, expensive books with cloth covers and gilt edges. And for Elena, a winter coat that fit perfectly and must have cost more than 2 months of her old salary. Adrian, this is too much. It's not nearly enough, he'd interrupted gently. Please, let me do this. Sophie had no such reservations. She'd thrown her arms around his legs. He'd gone rigid with surprise and announced that he was her favorite person except for Mama. And then, with the unfiltered honesty of childhood, she'd asked the question that had been building in Elena's mind for weeks. Adrian, why are you always so cold? The apartment went silent. Elena had frozen with serving spoons in hand, watching Adrian's face carefully. He crouched down to Sophie's level, meeting her eyes with complete seriousness. That's a very observant question, Sophie. The truth is, I have a condition. It makes my body temperature lower than most people's. Does it hurt? No, sweetheart, it doesn't hurt. Is that why you only visit at night? Because of your condition? Adrian had glanced up at Elena then, and she'd seen something in his eyes, a plea maybe or a warning. Yes, he'd said finally, that's part of it. Sophie had nodded, satisfied, and gone back to showing him her new books. But Elena had caught the weight beneath his words, the careful way he'd chosen them, the way condition could mean so many things. After dinner, which Adrian hadn't touched, claiming he'd eaten before arriving, Sophie fell asleep on the couch, her head in Elena's lap. Adrian sat across from them, his posture relaxed but his eyes watchful. She trusts you, Elena said quietly, running her fingers through her daughter's curls. Completely. She doesn't do that easily. She's remarkable. They both are. Adrian. Elena took a breath. What aren't you telling me? His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. Many things. Are you dangerous? Yes. No hesitation, no sugarcoating. But not to you. Never to you or Sophie. Then to who? To those who threaten what I protect. To enemies you'll hopefully never have to know exist. To myself, sometimes. Elena studied him in the dim light of the living room. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, muffling the city sounds. Inside, the radiator clanked and hissed, and Sophie breathed softly in sleep, and Adrian knocked her and sat perfectly still, waiting for judgment. I'm not stupid, Elena said finally. I know you're not what you seem. I know this apartment, this job, all of it. It's because of you, isn't it? You arranged it all. The job is real. You earned it. But yes, I facilitated certain opportunities. Why? Because I saw you returning that milk and something in me broke. Because your daughter called me kind. Because in 300 years, I've never met anyone who made me want to be better than what I am. The number hung in the air. 300 years. Elena's rational mind rejected it immediately, labeled it as metaphor or delusion. But her instincts, the ones that had kept her and Sophie alive through the worst years of their lives, whispered something different. What are you? The question came out calmer than she felt. Adrian held her gaze. If I tell you, everything changes. You can't unknow it. You can't go back to seeing me as just an eccentric rich man who took an interest in your family. I already don't see you as just that. Elena, tell me, please, whatever it is, I'd rather know than wonder. He stood, moved to the window, and looked out at the falling snow. His reflection in the glass was faint, almost transparent. I'm old, he said quietly. Older than this city. Older than the country you were born in. I was turned, made into what I am, in 1724, in a country that doesn't exist anymore, by a creature who saw in me something worth preserving. Turned, Elena repeated. Her heart was hammering now. Made into what exactly? He turned to face her, and in the darkness, his eyes caught the light from the street below, reflecting it back like polished mirrors. Like an animal's eyes. Like nothing human. I think you already know. And God help her. She did. The pieces had been there all along, the cold skin, the nocturnal schedule, the way he moved too smoothly, too quietly. The ageless quality of his face, the old-fashioned courtliness of his manners, the way he'd known things about her he shouldn't have known, found her when he shouldn't have been able to. "Vampire," she whispered. "Yes." Sophie stirred in her lap, and Elena's arms tightened around her daughter instinctively, protectively. Adrian noticed the gesture, and pain flashed across his face. "I should go," he said. "No." The word came out before Elena could think about it. "No, don't go. Just give me a minute." He waited, patient as stone, while Elena processed. Her mind raced through possibilities, dangers, implications. This man, this creature, could have killed her at any time, could have taken everything from her. Instead, he'd given, protected, cared. "Do you drink blood?" she asked finally. "Yes." "Human blood?" "Sometimes. From donors who consent, who understand what they're offering. I haven't killed in over a century. Elena. Not since I learned there were other ways." "And you're, how did you put it, a king?" A ghost of a smile. "The vampire king of this territory, yes. It's a political title more than anything. It means I maintain order among my kind, enforce laws, protect both vampires and humans from the worst of what my species can do. That's why you said you were dangerous. Because you have to be to do that job. Partially. Also because of what I am fundamentally. The hunger never goes away. Elena, I've just learned to master it." Sophie shifted again, murmuring in her sleep. Elena looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, then back up at Adrian. "You've been around us for weeks. Around Sophie. If you were going to hurt us, you would have done it by now. That's not necessarily." "Yes, it is. I've learned to read people, remember? And you." She shook her head, something between a laugh and a sob escaping. "You're the least threatening monster I've ever met. And I've met plenty of human ones." Adrian moved back to the couch, but didn't sit. He knelt instead, bringing himself to her eye level, careful to keep distance between them. "I won't lie to you. What I am is dangerous. My world is dangerous. There are others of my kind who wouldn't hesitate to use you and Sophie to get to me if they knew how much I—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "If they knew how much you mean to me." "How much do we mean to you?" "Everything." The word was raw, stripped of pretense. "You become everything." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. This was insane. All of it. She should be running, should be grabbing Sophie and fleeing to somewhere this beautiful, broken creature couldn't find them. But instead, she found herself asking, "If I told you to leave and never come back, would you?" "Yes." "Immediately." "And if I told you I needed time to think, but I didn't want you gone forever?" Hope flickered in his expression, so human despite everything he'd just revealed. "Then I would wait, for as long as it took." Elena looked down at Sophie again. This child she would die for, this miracle she'd somehow managed to keep alive and safe despite everything. Then she looked back at Adrian, this impossible being who had appeared in her darkest moment and offered light without asking for anything in return. "I need time," she said finally. "Not because I'm afraid. Well, I am afraid, but not of you. I'm afraid of what it means, getting involved with someone like you. I'm afraid of Sophie getting hurt. I'm afraid of caring about you and losing you. Those are all reasonable fears. But I don't want you to leave. I want," she took a shaky breath, "I want you to keep coming to coffee, keep visiting, keep being part of our lives. Just slowly, carefully, so I can figure out what this is, what it means." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm sure that you're the best thing that's happened to us in 6 years. Monster or not, you've been kinder to us than any human ever was. And if that makes me crazy, then—" She laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Then I guess I'm crazy." Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his cool hand covered hers where it rested on Sophie's shoulder. The temperature difference was shocking, but not unpleasant. "I will protect you both with everything I am," he said quietly. "I will never let my world touch yours unless you want it to. And if you ever decide that I am too dangerous, too complicated, I will disappear from your life so completely you'll wonder if I was ever real. I already wonder that sometimes. I'm real. Elena, this is real. Whatever this is. They sat like that for a long moment, connected by his hand on hers, by the weight of revelations and acceptance, by the sleeping child who trusted them both to keep her safe. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, muffling its sounds and sharp edges. Finally, Sophie stirred, blinking up at them with sleepy confusion. "Mama, is Adrian staying?" Elena looked at him, this ancient creature with sad eyes and a careful heart. "For a little while longer, baby. Is that okay?" "Of course it's okay. He's family." The word hit Adrian visibly. He drew in a sharp breath, unnecessary for a being who didn't need to breathe, and Elena saw his hand tremble slightly where it still touched hers. "Thank you," he whispered, and she wasn't entirely sure if he was thanking her or Sophie or some benevolent god he probably didn't believe in anymore. "You're welcome," Elena said simply, and in that moment, in a modest apartment with a sleeping child and falling snow and a vampire's hand covering hers, Elena Martinez made a choice. Not to stop being afraid. That would be foolish. But to stop letting fear be the only thing that decided her fate. Adrian had given her back the ability to choose, to hope, to imagine a future beyond mere survival. The least she could do was choose to let him stay in that future, whatever form it took, whatever he was, whatever dangers lurked in his world. He had been her salvation when she needed it most. And maybe, just maybe she could be his. The thought was audacious, ridiculous even. What could she possibly offer a 300-year-old vampire king? What could she give that he didn't already have? But as she watched him carefully lift Sophie from her lap and carry her to bed with a gentleness that made her heart ache, Elena thought she might understand. She could offer him what he'd lost centuries ago, and only just begun to remember. She could offer him humanity, connection, the simple, profound gift of being seen and accepted for exactly what he was. And maybe, in a world that made monsters of men and men of monsters, that was enough. Winter deepened, and with it, the connection between Elena, Sophie, and Adrian strengthened into something that defied easy definition. He was not quite family, not quite friend, not quite anything that had a name in the human world. But he was theirs, and they were his, and that seemed to be enough. Marcus, Adrian's second in command, was less convinced. "My lord, the council is asking questions." They stood in Adrian's office, the city sprawling beneath them in a carpet of lights. "Your involvement with the human woman and her child has not gone unnoticed. Let them ask." Adrian didn't look up from the report he was reading. Something about territorial disputes on the eastern border, vampire politics that suddenly felt tedious and meaningless. They're concerned that you become compromised, that your judgment is impaired. My judgment has never been clearer. Marcus had known Adrian long enough not to flinch from the ice in his tone. The question is whether you consider what happens when she starts aging and you don't. When Sophie asks why you look the same year after year, I've considered it extensively. And it doesn't matter. Whatever time I have with them, however brief in the scope of my existence, it's worth it. Marcus shook his head slowly. You're falling in love with her. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then quietly, I fell in love with them both the moment I saw Sophie try not to cry over a carton of milk. I just didn't recognize it until later. Before Marcus could respond, Adrian's phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Sophie wants to know if you're coming tonight. We're making Christmas cookies. Warning, they will be terrible." Adrian felt something in his chest loosen, a tightness he'd been carrying for 3 centuries finally releasing. "I have to go." "Marcus." Adrian stood, reaching for his coat. "I've spent 300 years being what everyone needed me to be. King, monster, protector, politician. For once in my endless existence, I'm going to be what I want to be, which is theirs." Within minutes, he was standing outside Elena's building, looking up at the lit windows that had become more home to him than his penthouse ever was. Elena answered his knock with flour on her cheek and laughter in her eyes. "You made it. Fair warning. Sophie has very strong opinions about cookie shapes, and we're currently in negotiations." Inside, the apartment smelled like sugar and vanilla and warmth. Sophie stood on a chair at the kitchen counter, wielding a cookie cutter with fierce concentration. When she saw Adrian, her whole face lit up. "Adrian, look, I'm making a star." He moved to stand beside her, this small human who had somehow claimed a piece of his eternal soul. "That's a beautiful star, Sophie. It's you." She looked up at him with complete seriousness. "You shine in the dark. That's what stars do." Adrian felt something in him crack and rebuild simultaneously. The evening passed in a haze of domestic simplicity that Adrian had never experienced, even in his human life. They made cookies that were indeed terrible, burnt on the bottom, raw in the middle, decorated with enough sprinkles to constitute a health hazard. When Sophie finally crashed from her sugar high and fell asleep on the couch, Elena and Adrian moved to the small balcony. The night was clear and bitterly cold. "She's going to be devastated when you leave," Elena said quietly. "I'm not leaving." "Everyone leaves eventually, Adrian. Even immortals." Adrian moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. "Your world has given me something mine never could. A reason to exist that isn't just survival or power or politics. You've given me purpose. Elena, you and Sophie both." Elena turned to face him fully. "You said love." "Yes. I know all the reasons why this is impossible. I know I'm asking you to accept something completely insane, a relationship with a vampire, a life in the shadows, the knowledge that I'll watch you grow old while I stay frozen in time. I know my world is dangerous and that being connected to me puts you both at risk. Then why are you here? Because for the first time in 300 years, I'm not just existing. I'm living. Because when Sophie called me family, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Because when I'm with you, I can almost believe in redemption." Elena's eyes were bright with tears. "I'm scared." Adrian reached out slowly and cupped her face in his hands. "I can't promise you forever. Immortality is a lie. Everything ends eventually. But I can promise you this. For as long as you'll have me, I will be here. I will protect you both with everything I am. I will love you both with whatever capacity for love remains in this dead heart. You do that? Leave if it meant keeping us safe. Without hesitation. Your happiness, Sophie's safety, those matter more than my own need to be near you." The tears spilled over then, tracking down Elena's cheeks. Adrian wiped them away with his thumbs, the gesture achingly gentle. "I love you," Elena whispered. "I don't want to. I know I shouldn't. But I do. Elena, let me finish. I love you, but I need you to understand something. Sophie comes first. Always. If your world ever threatens her, if being with you ever puts her in danger, I will take her and run so far you'll never find us. Do you understand?" "Yes. And I would help you run." "Even from yourself?" "Especially from myself." Then Elena rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, chaste, and tasted like tears and sugar and something that might have been hope. When she pulled back, Adrian was staring at her with an expression of wonder that made him look almost young, almost human. "Was that okay?" she asked. That was everything. They went back inside to find Sophie awake and watching them with knowing eyes. "Mama kissed Adrian," she announced. Elena flushed. "You were supposed to be asleep." "Does this mean Adrian is my dad now?" Adrian knelt down to Sophie's level, his expression serious. "I can't be your dad, Sophie. Your dad is someone else, somewhere out there. But I could be something else. Someone who loves you and your mama, who will always be here when you need me, who will protect you both no matter what." "Like a guardian angel?" Adrian glanced at Elena, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Something like that, though I'm probably the least angelic guardian in existence." Sophie threw her arms around his neck, and Adrian went very still, like he was afraid of breaking her. "I like you better than angels anyway," she said into his shoulder. "Angels don't make cookies." Over Sophie's head, Adrian's eyes met Elena's, and in that gaze was a promise more binding than any vow. Whatever came next, danger, discovery, the inevitable passage of time, they would face it together. It wasn't forever, but it was enough. It was Marcus who brought the warning days later, appearing at Elena's door when Adrian was out handling territorial matters. Elena opened the door to find a tall man with amber eyes that marked him as definitely not human. "Can I help you?" "Ms. Martinez." "I'm Marcus, Adrian's second in command." "May I come in?" Marcus entered, staying near the door. "I'll be brief. You need to understand what you've gotten involved in. There are factions within our kind who see Adrian's attachment to you as a weakness. The Council wants to meet you, to assess whether you're a genuine threat to operational security. I'm a single mother. How am I a threat to anything? You've made the Vampire King care about something other than power and stability. That makes him unpredictable, and unpredictable leaders are dangerous." Elena sank onto the couch. "What do they want?" "They want to know if you're using him. If you're a liability that needs to be eliminated." The word eliminated hung in the air like a blade. "Meet with them," Marcus continued. "Let them see that you're exactly what you appear to be. Be honest. Be yourself. If they believe you're genuine, they'll leave you alone. And if they don't," Marcus's expression was grim, "then Adrian will go to war for you. And a lot of people, vampires and humans, will die." When Adrian arrived later, Elena was waiting on the balcony. He took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" "Marcus came to see me. Your council wants to meet me. That I'm making you vulnerable. That people might die because you care about us." "Is it true?" "Parts of it." "Yes. The council wants to meet you." "Yes. Caring about you makes me vulnerable. But no one is going to die. I won't allow it. And if you have to choose, between us and your people, between keeping Sophie safe and maintaining your position as king." Adrian didn't hesitate. "I choose you. Every time. Without question. That's what I'm afraid of." Elena turned to face him fully. "You'd sacrifice everything for us. Your position, your people, your purpose. And eventually, you'd resent us for it." "Never." "Elena, listen to me." He took her hands. "I've lived for 300 years. I built empires and destroyed enemies. And all of it, every single bit of it, means nothing compared to the look on Sophie's face when she shows me her homework, compared to sitting in this apartment eating terrible cookies and feeling like I have a home. We're going to ruin you. No, you're going to save me. You already have." "I'll meet with your council," she said finally. "I'll prove I'm not a threat. But Adrian, if things get worse, if Sophie is ever in real danger because of me being with you, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll let us go. That you won't fight to keep us, if keeping us means putting Sophie at risk." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "I promise. But Elena, it won't come to that." "How can you be sure?" "Because I won't let it. Whatever I have to do, whatever I have to sacrifice, I will keep you both safe. That's my vow to you. Not as a vampire, not as a king, but as someone who loves you more than his own existence." Elena leaned into him then, letting his cold solidity anchor her. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the impossible complications of loving something that shouldn't exist, she felt safe. Because Adrian Nocturne, the monster who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up, would move heaven and hell to protect her daughter. The meeting with the council was set for the following week, and as Elena prepared to enter a world she'd never imagined existed, she held on to one certainty. Whatever happened next, whatever trials they faced, they would face them together. Her, Sophie, and the vampire who bought the milk and given them back their lives. And if that made them a family, strange, impossible, certainly doomed, then so be it. Love had always required a leap of faith. Elena was just learning to fall.